Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have an upload that I have never done before. I am interviewing a subscriber from Australia, and he is going to share with us his Yowie and Dogman encounters from the land down under. Before we get into that, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions, written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? All right, guys, today I have a very special upload. I have my first Australian. His name's Matt. Matt, how are you today?
Hey Jeff, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you
Hello, everyone.
Thank you for taking some time out of your day. We are 14 hours difference in time zones.
That's it. Yeah.
So,
not a problem.
No, I appreciate it. We've been trying to get together for a while now.
We have, yeah.
Matt's got some stuff, some encounters that he wants to share. And like always, I'm going to turn the floor over to Matt so he can share what he has witnessed in the land down under. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Cool. Thank you very much. It's an honor, Jeff. Hey everyone, my name's Matty. I'm from the northern side of Sydney, Australia. I've lived here all my life, and yeah, since a very small child, I've had strange experiences. You know, paranormal, everything from sort of ghosts, UFOs, and later cryptids. From a very early age, I seem to just have a knowing about a few certain things. You know, the ET phenomenon, for example. I don't know how much your listeners will be interested, but basically, here's a quick example. From as long as I can remember, I estimate from around sort of 3 years old until about 8 or 9, I had a deep-seated sort of fear of UFOs and aliens. Now, I'd never actually seen anything about them or knew sort of where they were from or anything, but just had this sort of fear. I used to actually say prayers of a night time before I'd go to sleep. You know, I don't know actually if I did get abducted or anything, but that's sort of the feeling I have now. But basically, I had this reoccurring dream before I was exposed to this sort of thing, and then at about age 8 or 9, my mum was watching this show. I think it was the Encounters, or might have been The Extraordinary, which was an Australian show, and basically they said that these things were, you know, extraterrestrial phenomenon, and I sort of didn't know what they were, and sort of went aha, you know, and sort of tied dots together, and sort of knew there was something to it, sort of as I had these dreams and that. So I mean, that sort of made me get a bit of an open mind, and I guess research sort of all things paranormal. And sort of as I got a bit older, I mean, I saw the Patterson Gimlin footage and always had a belief that it could be real. So I guess moving on, when I was around sort of 19 or 20, you know, I was sort of started getting heavily into the sort of spiritual new age sort of subjects. I mean, sort of had a look at everything, you know, got into sort of Zachariah Sitchin's work and the alike, but I had a keen interest in all sort of things paranormal, as I said. So one of my friends died tragically. He was hit by a car. I won't get into that, but we actually all took part in burying him. It was one of the last places in New South Wales, in Sydney especially, where they bury their own still to this day. So I would have been, yeah, about 21. We went to this place. It's called St Albans, which for anyone who knows, it's near a place called Wiseman's Ferry, which is north of Sydney, sort of middle of nowhere, touches on the Hawkesbury River there. And anyway, basically, we all took part in digging a grave for him and attended his funeral service. And this was about 2005. And anyway, me and my best friend Chris and our respective girlfriends at the time, we thought we'd camp, you know, instead of hiring one of the bungalows or the houses that were there like everyone else did. So here we are, the only sort of 4 people camping, and we were about already in the middle of nowhere, but there was a pub there, the St Albans pub. We were about about a kilometre, so 1,000 metres, which is, I don't know, 1.5, 150 yards, I guess, in your measurement. But we camped on the far other side of what would be like a big sort of, I guess, a couple of football fields behind this pub, and then all around us were these massive mountains. And basically, about 3 a.m, I estimate, I woke up, had my girlfriend next to me, who's usually a light sleeper because she had a small child, and the tent, Chris's tent with his girlfriend, was right next to mine, about an inch apart. You know, we thought for safety we'll pitch them, and I started sort of shaking my girlfriend, trying to wake her up. You know, do you hear this? I was punching at Chris's tent, you know, trying to wake them up, and they're all usually light sleepers, but everyone was dead to the world, and I couldn't believe it. These things were making, something was making such a noise on top of these mountains, like all around us. It was beyond anything a human could make. You know, it was almost like a Yahoo sound, sort of carried on with this sort of high pitched sort of trill noise at the end of it. But the breath span that would have taken for these things to make these noises was just amazing. You know, like they must have had a diaphragm the size of a 44-gallon drum. You know, but so I heard these things screaming. Sort of the noise would go for about a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes, and then another one would start going, and there must have been sort of 4 or 5 of them. But anyway, I knew instantly that these things wasn't a human up there. You know, they were so loud. You know, I don't think a group of 10 people with a megaphone could have replicated this noise. Anyway, somehow I hadn't done much study on Bigfoot, or here we call them Yowies, which in the native tongue means hairy man. Anyway, I instantly sort of my intuition knew exactly what was making these noises, and had pictures in my mind's eye of these things, these big hairy sort of ape man looking things sitting around, and unfortunately I was getting pretty horrid visual images in my mind's eye of them actually sitting around and eating the fresh corpse of my mate. So it was actually pretty full on. But you know, my brain doesn't just sort of invent macabre things like that, so I thought it was pretty strange. But the next day I asked everyone at the pub when we were having breakfast if they heard any noises. No one seemed to have heard anything, so it was very strange. I mean, I must have sat there for about an hour or two listening to these things that were just so loud. It was I guess what people describe as primal fear. It just scared the living shit out of me, I guess, is right. What we'd say here about it. But now to add to the events that happened then, about 8 years later, I was living up the Central Coast, a place called Mooney Creek, and that's for anyone who knows the area, it's near on the Hawkesbury River, near a place called Brooklyn. Anyway, I did a lot of fishing of a night around the area. I lived on the water, had a what we call a tinny, which is, you know, a 12 to 15 foot aluminium boat here with an outboard motor. We used to sort of putt round and fish of a night time, and I used to spend whole nights at a time out there fishing by myself. And I had this torch, I think it was 800 lumens, you know, with the beam that goes all the way to the sky. And I used to, when the fish weren't biting, you know, I'd spotlight the bush and I'd spotlight the things moving in the sky, and had all sorts of sightings of, you know, UFOs to other things, creepy feelings of being watched, and eye shines, various things, you know, eye shines that were sort of 6 to 8 feet tall, red eye shines, yellow eye shines. I saw a lot of things, heard noises, had stones thrown around my boat, had one hit the front of the boat once. Also, you know, people that might think it was fish jumping. Well, there was fish they're called mullet here, that jump around, but you hear the initial sound of them coming out of the water, then you hear the splash. Well, these were just big splashes, you know, and a rock sort of makes a kaplonk sound as opposed to a fish, you know. And right. Anyway, one hit the boat, as I said, and so things throwing rocks as I'd go closer to the land, and things like that. I'd talk to the locals. They were sort of few and far between, you know, but get a few beers into them, and they'd tell you some encounter stories of their own. Everyone sort of knew something strange was around there, and that led to, you know, what I won't call it full eyes on sightings, but I've seen bushes part and certain things like that, you know, when I'd have a feeling, and I'd point the torch and I'd see movement, you know. And this is sort of in areas that were just that far away from other houses as well. So one night we used to put our crab traps in where a freshwater stream had come into the salt water, and basically this is a place we go to. It take about 45 minutes up Mooney Creek, and as people who are familiar with the area will know, up there, basically once you get past the last houses on the left, the right hand side's completely inhospitable, but you're about 50 kilometres around you with no houses, no people, no fire trails or ways you could get there with a four-wheel drive or anything. Just basically on the right hand, it's a sheer vertical cliffs basically the whole way for about 40, 50 minutes. Up the creek. We go for about 2 hours before you get to the bridge on the F3 freeway there. Anyway, so no man's land basically, and we were checking the crab traps one night on a moonless night about midnight, and it wasn't my idea. My housemate used to like going out there of a night time, but anyway, this particular night there was no moon, and we were pulling into this creek to pull up and have a look at the trap, and we hear this branches breaking, massive what could only be described as bipedal footprints, footfalls in the mangroves. Now, mangroves, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but they're basically trees that grow out of the water, out of the mud there. So if a human's to walk around in the mangroves, you'd snap your ankle in about 2 strides, really. There's roots and all the tree roots sort of intertwine underneath the mud there. I mean, you'd be very hard-pressed as a human walking through that when you can see in the daytime, let alone on a pitch-black, moonless night.
I don't mean to cut you off real quick, but like a mangrove, like it's kind of like a swamp, like Louisiana would almost be.
That's right.
Now, what kind of crab are you? What kind of crab are you fishing for down there?
They're for mud crabs.
Okay.
They're called mud crabs. Yeah,
they're big, aren't they?
They are big, yeah. Like the biggest ones we got are about 2.5 kilos.
Wow.
So that'd be there's 2.2 pounds to a kilo.
Yeah.
So they'd be 5 pounds, I guess.
5-pound crab, that's big.
Yeah, man. And their arms and their nippers are as big as my forearm. I'm 6'2". My forearm's probably about from fingertip to elbow would be about 50 centimeters or so, or a foot and a half, a bit more.
Wow.
And their nippers were their claws are the size of my hands, but about 5 times as thick. So these things that take your tops off.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just the way you were talking.
You're all right.
I saw like
sure.
I saw like an Australian survivalist show, and I remember them talking about the mangroves and the mud crabs. And they were very good eating, I guess, too.
They are. They're lovely, mate. Yeah, we just cook them. You chuck them in the pot alive, and about 15 minutes, pull them out, wait for them to cool down a bit, and mate, just nothing but a bit of hot chili sauce, and mate, they're just beautiful. Cold, hot, doesn't matter, anything. They're just lovely eating. But there's another type we go for, blue swimmers, but they're sort of more out. They're more out in the open, But these sort of like where the fresh water meets the salt water, freshwater stream goes in. So, I mean, around this area, there's plenty of fresh drinking water. There's plenty of animals and oysters, crabs, fish, like plenty of things plenty of animals for these things to eat.
But so there's a lot of places for these things to hide. There's a lot of water, like you just said, and a lot of accessibility to food.
That's it, and especially what made it particularly interesting is that the place where this happened, there is literally no way that a human could get to it. Like there's no roads, there's no unless they hiked for, as I said, it was an hour-long boat trip. So we're going, at least 20, 30 miles an hour, I'd say, 50 k's an hour, something like that. With my housemate Tim's boat, which was a 15 horsepower, which went a bit quicker than my 6. But anyway, we'd gone up there 12 o'clock at night, as I said. There was no sign of camping, or as I said, it's a sheer 45-degree angle, sort of like on the right-hand side, cliff face with sort of cave. You literally be hard-pressed to get to the top of it. It'd take a couple of hours, I think, Okay. So this thing was stomping through the mangroves in pitch black, and mind you, we heard this coming towards us over the 15 horsepower outboard motor on idle. So, I mean, it scared the shit out of us, basically, mate. Like we didn't go in and get the trap. We come back in the morning, and mate, I pulled my trap up, and it was they're made basically of 2 rings of steel with nylon rope sort of tied in between, which when you put in the water and it sinks basically, with the float on it and that, it sort of opens up and basically the crab goes in. We put either a dead fish or I think I had an eel that I'd caught in this one as bait. And as I said, when I ripped the trap out the next morning, the nylon was completely teared off. You could tell that it wasn't cut. It was pulled until the rope had stretched to the point where it had snapped. You could see how it was like stretched and bent and then made like as you can imagine, it stretched the nylon to the point where it was like sort of curly at the ends, You could tell it was done sort of by force, not cut. But that's the only time we actually sort of heard something stomping around in there. So, yeah.
Wow.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah.
That was one experience, but I mean, it was scary. It wasn't quite as scary as was when I heard them shrieking, off the mountain. But that was my 2 experiences with the hairy man or the Yowie, and I've actually done a bit of research, spoken to Aboriginal elders, Indigenous elders about these things, and I mean they're not like quick to give the white man information about this. I mean, this is sort of sacred, hidden knowledge. We'll say that they teach their children about this from about initiation age of about 12, but they don't actually really. It's a secret even in their own culture. So I mean, you really have to sort of make friends and make sure they know that you mean well before they'll talk to you about this stuff. And anyway, at the pub, as I said, when the beers are flowing, and you actually get someone away from their group of friends who might sort of, people still what we call take the piss out of other people, as in, tease, belittle people about these things, go, oh, sure, yeah, yeah, he's in the drop bears, I think drop bears comes from koala or whatever, but basically they love telling foreigners that there's these animals out there that'll get you in the bush, but really, there's not really much that will, other than sort of our venomous snakes and spiders, and we don't have bears, we don't have wolves. I mean, feral dogs, yeah, well, maybe, but leading on to my next story, me and the guy that I actually was working with at the time, I'm actually working with him again now. Funny, his name's Mike, but anyway, we were down in the bush. Now, this area is called St Ives, the Ku-ring-gai National Park, which actually joins on to both the locations that I was telling you about previously, but I think this path of bush goes all the way past Newcastle, actually most of the way to Queensland up north, I think. But basically, this is suburban Sydney, like St Ives. You wouldn't think there'd be much around. But St Ives there.
Yep.
David Paulides actually came to Australia, Missing K&M project, and did a Australian episode of it, which I saw, and there was a lady called Guida Coot who went missing in this exact bushland where I'm about to tell you this story, St Ives National Park, Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, and basically my story goes is I saw, this is well before, mind you, that I'd ever heard of Dogman or knew that these creatures existed. This is after my first initial experience, so I knew there was these things, Yowies, potentially out there, and I'd heard stories of Black Panthers and stuff, the stories of people have seen, but never did I ever think that there was something out there that looked like this. But anyway, we're walking through the bush. It was about 3 p.m. in the afternoon on a summer's day, full sun. I mean, we're walking down this bush track, and it's not far from civilization at all, mind you. Walking down to a bit of a valley, I guess over there you call it a hollow. Well,
yep.
This is sort of there's sort of houses on each side of this big sort of valley, and we're walking sort of a couple of k's downwards, like downhill, sort of probably on a 30-degree angle, sort of for about a k and a half, so close to a mile, sort of down behind his parents' house in this sort of street that backs onto the national park in St Ives there. And this is, mind you, it's I've spent a lot of time in the bush in my life, houses that have backed onto the bush, and playing army man and exploring and doing all that as you do as kids. I've seen a lot of wildlife, but mind you, this side of of the valley. I grew up on the other side, but this side of the valley, going from sort of northern Turramurra side through the Hawkesbury, all the way sort of through this area of St Ives. As I said, it goes through this band all the way up to Queensland. But this bush track, I've seen every animal in Australia pretty much besides an emu. I've seen roos, both types, red, eastern greys. I've seen wallabies. I've seen echidnas, you name it, everything but koalas. I think we have down here. We don't have koalas in Sydney, and we don't have the Tasmanian devil. That's only around Tassie and that. But pretty much every type of wildlife. I mean, it comes right up to the houses. But we were walking down one day, and middle of the day, 3 p.m, and we weren't trying to keep quiet or anything. We were, as I said, we're walking sort of high up, going down this hill. We get to this section where we call it a cliff. I don't know, you guys probably don't with the mountains you got there, but we're about probably 20 meters, I guess, sort of 60 feet high up or so, I'd say, a bit more, looking down, and we're probably looking about 130 feet or 75 meters, something like that. And to our left, we could see a proper fire trail, which was like a walking track with a lady walking her dog down this track. And to our right, a little bit closer, we could see this creature. Now, at first, we didn't know what we were looking at. We were both sort of in a bit of a trance. We weren't making any noise. We're both sort of in our own heads, looking at this thing, just going, "What the hell is that?" Like, as I said before, I I'd heard of these Dogman creatures, and it definitely was canine. I think sort of 85% canine, maybe 15% looked almost like a kangaroo. Now, it wasn't a kangaroo because this thing was black and white, or black, white, and grey. Now, anyone who knows the fauna here will know kangaroos are either red, the big reds, or the eastern greys. They're a grey colour. There's no black, there's no white, there's no black and white for sure. That's kangaroos. And it was definitely like a snout, very sort of canine looking in its body. As I said, I couldn't quite see its leg structure or feet, as it was up to sort of, what would be to us probably waist high brush around it. But I mean, it had its left side and back to us, and it was intently looking at this lady walking her dog. Like, I mean, like if you saw a human doing this, you would think like stalker, so,
Right.
But it was very sort of, it was almost like it was hunting, and it was parting the bushes and trees in front of it with what could only be described as hands, I guess. This thing, as I said, it was black sort of skin or black face and that, with almost like a mane, longer hair around its head and neck, and upper back, and then probably only about sort of inch or 2 inch hair over its body. And it was sort of like a mix of blacks to whites to grey. It was definitely on 2 feet. It definitely sort of had arms, definitely had a snout. The only sort of difference that didn't, make me think werewolf or whatever straight away is it had floppy ears. Like, instead of having straight up like cropped ears of a Doberman or a German Shepherd, sort of pointy ears, this thing had more sort of Labrador ears, like floppy sort of ears, and it had sort of bushy hair on its face, so like a black snout with sort of bushy white to grey hair, and these sort of grey to black to white sort of floppy ears, which was just like, we were just awestruck. We didn't know what we were looking at. It was quite sort of scary. I felt at first we were just too busy going, what the F is that, but
Right.
after it seemed about 10 minutes, but it must have been at least a full minute or two, I'd say 2 minutes, that we were looking at this thing. It never looked around at us. I mean, we didn't make much noise. As I said, we were pretty far away, but we only sort of saw the side profile, and this thing was ducking. It was moving the bushes from in front of its face, peering out. Got a pretty good look at it, and it was definitely something that we'd never seen, and it only occurred to us after about a minute or two. Shit, if this thing turned around and if it wanted to, it could probably make it to us in a matter of seconds. So we got scared all of a sudden, and we legged it. We got out of there, mate. tell you what, quick smart. But yeah, from that day, mate, I sort of never heard or seen of anything like that, and that's sort of, I guess, what sparked my interest in this whole phenomenon.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I mean,
so I guess from then on, I've been, I've watched every show and podcast and yeah, I'm quite interested in it now.
Yeah, when you and I were talking, because we talked for a while before the interview,
Yeah.
I was saying, I don't believe that I mean, I think these creatures are like human beings in the way that they look. People are different.
Yeah.
There's different. People have different ear structures. People have different hair
Yeah.
growth, and I don't not necessarily think that they all have to have cropped ears.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you
just look at dogs, like breeds of dogs,
Right. The way you were describing it, it was most definitely stalking that woman and like hunting her, if not both,
really was.
the dog and her.
It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't going towards her, but it was like, in my opinion, if it should have like heard us, looked, it wasn't paying attention to its surroundings, sort of thing. It was completely transfixed on this woman, and we watched her walk from sort of high up on this path on the hill on the other side, walking down to almost right down to the bottom. There was a little bit of a creek where sort of both a bit of a gully, sort of in the middle of this sort of valley there, and she walked over the creek. The dog didn't seem to be noticing anything. I mean, wasn't alerting its presence or anything. It was just like this thing was invisible. I will one thing I will say is it definitely was quiet. Now I've heard of like what they call the silence, the deathly silence. That accompanies a lot of these encounters, and I can definitely say, the bird noise had stopped. We didn't notice any sound. It was almost like we walked into a bubble, and we were just. It was really, really strange. I mean, we were, I'm sure we probably, one of us would have had a phone on us. I don't know how the camera technology was. This is 10 years ago, but I'm sure we probably had a camera phone, but neither of us had any thought of taking a photo or anything. We didn't even talk to each other pretty much until the end when we were like, run, but yeah, looking back at it, it's scary. But I mean, at the time, I didn't feel sort of any fear until the very sort of last minute when we went, shit, this thing's probably would have at least been 7 foot, 6 to 7 feet. It was. I imagine it would have been taller than me. I'm a bit taller than my friend Mike, but we both thought it would have towered over us. And yeah, I've spoke to him now. He won't he won't bring it up. He won't talk about it in front of anyone, and he's told me numerous times that he won't. But basically, that's just because people would ridicule the shit out of us, But we both saw it. We've discussed it. It was 10 years ago, but not 6 months ago. We had a few beers after work alone one day, and we chatted about it for half an hour. And what he recollects is exactly what I recollect. We both saw the same thing. And yeah, we basically said it was like the biggest dog you've ever seen, standing on 2 feet, with arms and hands, like parting the bushes. Like, I mean, a dog doesn't have control, sort of. It's not as dexterous, like with its hands, like with its paws and that. It's incapable of doing what we saw this thing doing. It was very human looking in its movements that we saw. That's for sure. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Do me a favor, don't hang up when we end this. But is there anything that you'd like to say to your fellow subscribers before we end the upload?
Yeah, look, if there's anyone out there that's holding on to something and that they're worrying, and ahhing whether they should contact Jeff, please do. It's taken me a couple of years of listening to encounters before I finally decided that I would talk about my one. And yeah, anyone out there in Australia who's seen something like this. I mean, I know of stories of truck drivers that have seen things like werewolves looking things or big dog-looking things run across the road. I know there's other people out there that have seen them, but these things seem to be very, very rare compared to over there. So if there's anyone out there, Jeff's a lovely bloke. No one here's going to discredit you or ridicule you, so don't be afraid. Tell him your story.
Absolutely.
We're here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matty.
Sure.
I really appreciate you coming on, buddy.
Mate, it's an honor. Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
All right. You have yourself a wonderful day.
You too, my man. Take care.
Wow. Matt is a super nice guy. I had the honor of talking to him for about an hour and 10 minutes before the interview. Definitely a little nervous. He is got a really good view on everything. It was cool to talk to somebody from Australia because the majority of my encounters people that I interview are from over here in America. And it was just really an interesting interview. I'm really happy that I got to interview him. And what a terrifying encounter he had. If you think about what this thing looked like, the floppy ears is strange, but it had a mane in black and white. And this was before he even knew what Dogman was. So, wow. What a great guy. I had a blast talking to him. We talked about everything under the sun. And it's kind of crazy that the Australian government is doing what the American government is doing here. So it's worldwide, I guess, the shadow government. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's interview as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. And with that, I'm going to bid you farewell. Thank you for always listening, and be kind to each other. See ya!